afternoon. I'm Maria Rosa Vaquerizo. I am the Executive President of the Peruvian American Association and the CEO of the Andean American Associations. I would like to welcome all of you to today's program. Peru post-election, what lies ahead? We are fortunate to have as speakers today Dr. Paula Muñoz of Universidad del Pacífico, Kelly Bisset Tom of Fitch Ratings, and Jose Gonzalez of GCG Advisors. He will be our moderator and he will explain further how to ask questions during the seminar. Thank you very much to all of you and thanks for your participation. A few words about the Peruvian American Association. It was founded in 1939 and it was the first chamber of commerce for Peru established in the United States. We are a non-for-profit organization and we provide a forum for the leaders that are shaping the future of Peru. We welcome today a long and distinguished list of participants, including Ambassador Maria Landaveri, Consul General of Peru in New York. We'd like to give a warm welcome to Marcela Carlin of Goya Foods. She is a director of the Peruvian American Association, as well as a supporting member of the association. Claudia Angulo and Kathleen Holtzman of Fitch Ratings, Ana Blanco of PMI, Maria Vizcaíno of Bloomberg, Gideon Long from the Financial Times, Rodrigo Campos of Reuters, and representatives from major banks, BBVA, Citi, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Itaú, Scotiabank, UBS, and Wells Fargo. We also have the rating agencies, the US Trade Department, several universities.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
That was Siri. Okay, so I would like to introduce our speakers. Dr. Paula Muñoz, she's an associate professor of social and political sciences at Universidad del Pacífico and a researcher at CIUP. She holds a PhD and an MA in political science from the University of Texas in Austin. She has a bachelor's degree in social science from Catholic University of Peru. Dr. Muñoz won in 2014 the Juan Lins Award for Best Doctoral Thesis. Dr. Muñoz is a member of the steering committee of the Latin American Political Economics Network, REPAL, as well as a member of the Latin American Association of Political Science, LACIP, and the Latin American Studies Association, LASA, and the American Political Science Association, APSA. Her areas of expertise are decentralization, campaigns and electoral mobilization, clientelism, distribution strategies and political intermediation, and corruption and social policies. Now let me pass to the next speaker, who is Kelly Bisset Tom. She's a director of Fitch Ratings Sovereigns Group in New York, and she's responsible for analysis and ratings of sovereign credits in Latin America. Her portfolio includes Canada, Peru, Dominican Republic, Aruba, and Suriname. Prior to joining Fitch in 2015, Kelly was a credit analyst for Central American and Caribbean sovereign ratings and multilateral bank ratings at Standard & Poor's. Kelly earned her master's degree from the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, CIPA, with the concentration in finance and economic policy. She has a bachelor's degree in foreign service, Spanish and economics from Alma College. And now our moderator, Jose Gonzalez. He's a managing partner of GCG Advisors in New York and director at Life Invest Asset Management. He has had long experience covering emerging markets and distressed assets, having worked at Grupo de Empresas Econoinvest, LW Securities, Credit Lyonnais Securities, ING Barings, Nomura Research, among others. Between 1982 and 1990, he was a journalist, a foreign correspondent, human rights advocate, and political analyst based in Lima, Peru. He holds a BA in Communication Sciences from the Universidad de Lima in Peru and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University in the city of New York. He has done studies towards a PhD in sociology at the University of California at Berkeley. And now I will turn the meeting over to Jose.
Thank you, Mara Rosa. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Just a very, very brief introduction to Peru post-election, what lies ahead. Winston Churchill said in 1939 about Russia that it was a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. But he also said that perhaps there is a key, and the key is Russia's national interest. In regards of Peru's presidential runoff, we have today, as Maria Rosa said, Dr. Paula Muñoz from Universidad del Pacífico and Kelly Bisset Tom from Fitch Ratings in New York to help us with riddle mystery enigma of the presidential elections in Peru and its national interest and beyond. It's not only key to know what's going to happen in June 6th, but what would happen beyond that date, whoever gets elected. We start with Professor Muñoz, and then we follow with Kelly. Each one will have 15 minutes for a presentation, and then we will do 20 minutes of Q&A. You can start doing your questions in the Q&A icon that is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll moderate those questions after our presenters finish with their presentations. Thanks very much. We'll start with Dr. Muñoz.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to try to be synthetic and try to answer the questions that have been posed to me. So I'm going to begin by first trying to answer a first question, that is, how did Castillo, a radical left candidate who did not appear as a viable option in the polls by late March, manage to make it to the runoff? I believe that three factors can account for this surprising result. First, the political effects of the acute political institutional crisis that Peruvians lived between 2016 and 2020. During the last 5 years, Peruvians witnessed the development of a growing confrontation of the executive and legislative powers, intensified by an external event that shocked the Peruvian political system: the internationalization of the Lava Jato investigation. These inter-branch clashes quickly became intertwined with a series of corruption allegations implicating politicians both in and out of power and across all branches of government. This institutional crisis produced high political instability. As you know, we had 4 presidents in less than 5 years, but it also resulted in policy paralysis at critical points of time, with particularly serious consequences during the pandemic. So this is the institutional crisis had 2 clear political effects on the election. On the one hand, the election confirmed that that we are in the highest peak of citizens' dissatisfaction with the political system since the 2000 democratic transition. During the first round, we mainly witnessed citizen indifference and apathy. Voters simply didn't like enough any of the candidates. In contrast to previous electoral processes, a greater proportion of voters did not define their vote as the campaign unfolded, with a record of 30% of voters who did not decide their vote or declare would vote blank or null by late March. Castillo, as fair runner himself, got an equivalent or even less to what the third candidate got in all previous presidential elections since 2001. Moreover, in contrast to previous elections in which the first 3 runners concentrated on average 80% of the valid votes, in 2021, Castillo, Fujimori, and López de Aliaga added up to only 45% of the vote. The counterpart to this citizen discontent as this counterpart, the political crisis also weakened the electoral prospects of the establishment candidates, widening even more the representation gap. The electoral punishment of the establishment parties who were responsible of this crisis was already observed in the 2020 legislative election. Fuerza Popular, the majority force in the dissolved Congress, was severely punished, diminishing its elected legislators from 72 in 2016 to only 15 in 2020, and APRA did not even pass the electoral threshold. Instead, 5 new parties not elected in 2016 achieved representation. Moreover, as we see in the current election, voters also looked for new actors, first Forsyth, then Lopez Aliaga, De Soto, and Castillo himself, but all of them without becoming completely convinced by anyone. The voters didn't get convinced by anyone. So this is the first factor. The second factor that explains the first round results is, on my view, extreme fragmentation. That is, this is an intensification of an ongoing trend in our political system. Extreme fragmentation is thus a result of the weakness of existing political parties, of the improvisation of political actors and candidacies. In 2021, we had 19 candidates for the presidency and 20 lists for Congress. In the absence of organized party, neither conservatives, nor leftists, nor broadly defined centrists were able to coordinate, paving the way for this outcome. Hence, up to only 1 week before the election date, vote intention polls showed a technical draw of 5 candidates with discrepancies between poll firms of who the first 5 would be. This incapability to coordinate was particularly noticeable in the right spectrum, which divided itself into 6 candidacies that together added up 45% of the valid votes. This division is surprising considering that the division of the right in the 2016 election was partly responsible for the political drama that came later, no? This confrontation between two right-wing actors. Without parties that lengthen their time horizons, politicians were simply not capable to coordinate to protect their interests. And this division ultimately explained why Fujimori came second in this election. And finally, a third, and in my view, even more important factor is the COVID-19 pandemic and its political effects, that I will discuss as next as part of the answer to the second question that I want to share with you. So in my view, who is more likely to win? In my opinion, the structural conditions do not seem to be in place to repeat the vote in defense of the status quo, that is to the economic model, as happened in 2006 when Alan Garcia won Ollanta Humala. I think the 3 factors can explain it. First, it is just a very different context from a political economy perspective. The contextual circumstances that are today more similar to the ones we had in the 1990 election than to the 2006 one. The 2006 election took place at the beginning of the economic boom. Today, we have a deep and compounded crisis that generates fear, losses, and extreme anxiety in the majority of voters, as happened in 1990 for other reasons. Besides the political crisis that I already talked about, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a tremendous impact on Peruvian society, both in sanitary and socioeconomic terms. In fact, Peru experienced some of the world's highest COVID-19 mortality rates, and importantly, the impact of the pandemic has been very uneven. Poorer people working in the informal sector are suffering and dying much more. After many years of economic bonanza, a lot of people find it necessary to organize common pots to eat. The pandemic thus opens ground to repoliticize existing structural divisions, class and territorial divides that were latent in 2006 and 2011. We have thus underestimated the political effects of the pandemic. Why voting for change that seems so uncertain now? Prospect theory in cognitive psychology shows that when people are in the domain of losses, as in a crisis of this magnitude, are willing to take more risk than when they are on the profit side. Since I don't have much more to lose anymore anyway, I'm more willing to gamble. The second factor is related to the position against the radical option. In 2006, Garcia did not defend the status quo. Since 2001, he reappeared with a discourse in favor of regulating and moderating the market. In 2006, he presented himself as the responsible option for change. Keiko Fujimori, in contrast, is not promising much change. He presents herself instead as the model defenders against communists. And lately, she has only engaged in a very economically responsible proposals that appear that she's trying to buy off votes from desperate people. Third, the candidates' profiles and their ability to emotionally connect with voters also favor Castillo. Castillo represents the novelty, an important card in Peruvian electoral races. He proposes changes that emotionally tune in with a big number of citizens fed up with the political system and in despair in times of crisis. This emotional connection is eased up because there is an identity factor as well behind it. Castillo is from a peripheral province, a provinciano of humble origins, and people think he knows, so in particular the poorer people, he thinks how we live and he will understand because he knows how we suffer daily on a daily basis. In contrast, Fujimori is perceived as part of the political establishment that is responsible for the multiple crises that we are experiencing. Fuerza Popular had an absolute majority of Congress between 2006 and 2019, but they were an abusive and irresponsible majority that did not care for democratic governments. They did not build either their own parliamentary agenda. Furthermore, she is one more politician from the establishment accused of corruption. For a majority of voters, then, she is the corrupt establishment's representative. In this sense, she is also differently positioned than Lasso in Ecuador. In addition to this, she inherits an anti-Fujimorismo that is still very strong in Peru. In summary, it is not impossible for Fujimori to win, but she has an uphill fight and she's not doing well enough while campaigning, at least yet. Her campaign of fear of communism is only polarizing more the race. Now the resistance to Castillo is more territorially concentrated in Lima only and encapsulated within the highest income brackets of among voters. Fujimori is not being able to be empathetic enough until now, at least, to be able to really connect with poorer, with people in despair, and to make her candidacy credible on the democratic front. And the resistance to Fujimori's candidacy is much higher in the 50s than Castillo's, that is in the 30s. So within this context, and this is the last part of my presentation, what scenarios of governance I see? First, the first thing before discussing the scenarios is that I want to call for some caution. We should avoid simplistic readings and calculations because with a very fragmented Congress as the Peruvian one, the one that has been elected without real parties, we have a high unpredictability. We don't know how they are gonna really act. That said, I think I see three likely scenarios if any of the two candidates win. First, the establishment of a tacit pact of pragmatic coalitions based on power distributions and the like, vote by vote. This is a stability gained at the expense of populist initiatives. All the irresponsible, happy, both in Congress and in the executive. Second, a situation that I see that may be more likely is a Syrian instability and power confrontations continuing, similar to what we have experienced in the last years. Until now, both candidates could get enough votes, that is 44, in Congress to block vacancia attempts as the mechanism used to oust Vizcarra. Third, less likely but not impossible, I believe that the construction of a more openly authoritarian outcome via the concentration of power in the executive is also possible. There is this is also, but it's important to make sure that to say that this is the least likely scenario, because precisely as a result of the conflict and abuse of constitutional mechanisms of horizontal control during the last years, there has been a strengthening of Congress and a weakening of the executive institution. And beyond that, we are not in good economic times, so there is not a lot to distribute to please people. The way the runoff campaign unfolds in the first months of government will be a key to define possible governance scenarios with greater certainty. That is why it will be very important to pressure Congress to be responsible and avoid initiating or escalating a conflict, particularly if the president, whoever he or she is, moderates at the beginning of his or her term. So this is all I had prepared. Thank you, and I'm open for the discussion and any questions or comments that may come up.
Thank you, Paula. Precise in time, 14 minutes, 27 seconds. Now we go with Kelly, that is going to give you a view of how the agencies, the risk agencies see Peru, how Fitch looks at Peru in this election and going forwards. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Jose, and the Peruvian American Association for the opportunity to present on the panel. I think, Jose, we were thinking of doing a kind of a conversational style panel discussion if you'd like to proceed that way. Otherwise, I can move forward with the remarks.
Can move forward, Kelly. I'll follow you as you start.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, sure. I think the first question that we discussed is what is Fitch's view on from the rating agency perspective, and
correct.
In that vein, we rate Peru as the second highest rating in Latin America after Chile. Peru's strengths include the moderate government debt burden, near 35% of GDP at the end of last year, a stabilization fund that was financed with prudently pre-pandemic with mining revenues, and that has partly financed the pandemic response, as well as in the preceding 6 years, the financing for countercyclical fiscal policy in response to El Nino flooding damage in northern Peru. Other strengths include a credible monetary policy regime, low inflation record over the preceding 2 decades, and economic growth above most in the region, although declining slightly below the BBB median on a trend basis.
Correct. And how does the state of Peru's, go ahead, finish your thoughts, please.
Segueing there, we view both the intergovernmental relations and presidential agenda as important points for the rating and general credit worthiness, affecting both the business environment, but also the operating environment for banks and corporates and other entities within Peru. Looking forward, and we could divide those into 2 questions and try to get it over to you, Jose.
How does the state of Peru political institutions inform the rating? And how did the governability challenge of 2016 to 2020 would affect this rating?
We placed Peru's BBB+ ratings on negative outlook back in December 2020, following the political turmoil of November, and during which we saw 3 presidents rotate in quick succession in a very short period of less than a week. The negative outlook is driven by 3 key factors. One, the weakened political institutions that we've discussed, and that provide some background to the current electoral environment. Second, the moderate erosion of the government balance sheet. Again, the debt burden is moderate, but the fiscal space has been used in response to both the pandemic, but also some of the pre-pandemic investment and deviation from the fiscal rule. And then as well, the exhaustion of the more liquid fiscal buffers that were prudently saved, again, from mining and other revenues under fairly strong adherence to Peru's fiscal rules that has supported fiscal policy credibility. The third factor behind the negative outlook is the expectation of looking forward challenges to reducing public deficits consistent with debt stabilization. And I can elaborate there in two senses. One, on the economic front, we expect in social front, we expect higher social demands, more fundamental economic challenges from the labor market, as well as some pending policy challenges, chiefly among them labor market flexibility reform that has been pending for well over a decade, and it's kind of highlighted most strongly in the high labor and business informality that complicated the pandemic response and was a detracting factor in the pandemic landscape in Peru relative to other countries, even in Latin America. Another key factor is just the fiscal consolidation path. Certainly it's challenging for every country coming out of the pandemic, but we're looking for the capacity of the government to stabilize the debt burden to GDP and chart a credible fiscal consolidation path, understanding that it does take a period of years for most governments coming out of the pandemic to stabilize the burden. So again, we see not only for political reasons, but an increase in social and social demands in response to the pandemic, but also more and more complicated economic landscape that in combination could put more negative pressure on the rating. And so that was really the driver for the negative outlook, again, back in December. I think in addition to the institutional factors, we're now looking at more activity within the touch point of the presidential agenda, in which we assumed at the time of the negative outlook, again, a few months ago, more policy continuity. And I think there, I think we see more potential for action, if you will.
And now, how does the rating agency see within this governability challenge in the political period that will start in July 28th? How do you see how difficult will be for somebody like Castillo with the proposal we've been hearing this campaign that have been starting to change in the last 24 hours to implement his economic agenda within this framework you already have outlined for us?
We are monitoring how the candidates' agendas evolve and, importantly, the concrete policy plans of how they intend to govern with regard to the rating trajectory and reviews that will occur this year. That's an important factor in terms of timing questions that we've received from the market. So we're looking at the concrete policy proposals, concrete policy plans, and what the candidates intend to do, taking into consideration Peru's institutions or changes to those institutions. We still attach weight on one hand to the experience of in moderation of former President Humala, and we would like to see how either candidate's policy plans would play out in office. That said, policy initiatives, once more concrete, that undermine the pillars of Peru's macro stability, investment in growth prospects materially, or the anchors of Peru's fiscal policy credibility, could trigger negative rating pressure. That's a relatively new development, but it's one that we've signaled with a negative rating sensitivity in our recent rating statements. Within the outlook, we've done some look at how the policy proposals could be implemented. Peru has fairly strong constitutional strictures and a very high bar to change the constitution. A majority of both the Congress, if not a supermajority, and at least 1 to 2 public referendums would be required to partially or in whole rewrite the Constitution. And so that would require support from center-right parties in Congress, as well as sustained momentum, shall we say, from the national electorate to support the referendums for changes. So we think it's difficult to change, especially the economic chapter of the Constitution. Also, free trade agreements. Peru is a very strong network of 23 trade agreements. Some of them have very strong investment chapters. So some of the more contract sensitive or market sensitive proposals that we've seen could trigger arbitration clauses within those FTAs that would have just more complicating factors for a quick movement on some of these proposals. It's not impossible to exit the trade agreements, but they do take some time. The U.S. FTA, for instance, would be a 6-month window there, but it would be difficult for any government to implement some of these agenda proposals quickly. But there could be, again, the measures taken with regard to the central bank. Another point that we're watching in terms of policy continuity. So the next president will appoint and require the ratification in the Congress of a portion of the 7 members of the central bank board, including the president. The remainder are selected by Congress. So both, again, returning back to the governability point, there will need to be some degree of consensus between the president and the Congress to fill those seats, and agreement among them on the direction of the central bank will be important, and as well as signals on policy continuity will be key for us and for the market. Maybe a final point to note is that Keiko Fujimori, the second candidate in the second round, her policy agenda signals more policy continuity, but she is targeting some more micro proposals that we're monitoring. One of them is a movement on or efforts to reduce informality and broaden the tax base. That may take more time to bear out, and so we're also monitoring some of the other comments on fiscal policy, what she would, her campaign would plan in terms of the revenue side, but also managing as well some of the fiscal commitments that she proposes and this government has on the books. So we're looking on the whole at, again, more concretely how the candidate platforms evolve in the upcoming we expect the remaining 3 or 4 presidential debates with close attention, and but really looking at how the proposals evolve more concretely to avoid any, shall we say, snap credit reading on with regard to the outlook. So.
And to finish this part of the presentation, Kelly, in the current situation right now, what are the macro and credit implications of the sol depreciation, which has debilitated significantly? I mean, based on previous movement of the sol since the first round of elections and going towards the runoff.
We debate this internally in terms of the magnitude of depreciation, and there I say depreciation is within the eye of the beholder. and for Peru, the depreciation is quite significant relative to the dollar. But on the whole, relative to some of the depreciation that we've seen around the globe in the last year, or with regard to other more free-floating commodity exporters, this is more of a bout of short-term volatility, if you will. Heading into the election period, we do observe that Peru has fairly strong economic, still post-crisis economic fundamentals, there was a strong base effect last year on the growth front, and and private investment is queued up essentially, currently somewhat on pause because of the election cycle, but a fairly strong pipeline of mining investment, other investment to move forward, and as well as less perhaps economic scarring despite some of the labor market issues, but to the broader economy, still fishing, lumber, certainly mining investment and exports that have remained quite dynamic aside from the second quarter shutdown, and supporting a fairly relatively robust recovery. Again, labor market, slow recovery aside, that we expect to really take firmer hold in the latter part of the year as vaccination rates pick up. In terms as well though, in terms of the fundamentals, copper prices remain quite robust. So with a fairly strong baseline economic bounce back expected, benefit of external copper prices, we see the fundamentals as quite strong, election considerations aside in the short term. And speaking to that, the central bank's robust balance sheet is a cornerstone. The central bank has reserves over 80 billion on its balance sheet. It's intervened with about 3 billion of late, but that has mainly been with derivatives. It's only used about $400 million US in the spot market intervention. So it's really used derivative tools in line with its recent practices for intervention purposes, for smoothing it, if you will. So we see, again, we expect this, our near-term expectation is that these are more short-term pressures on the sol. We've also taking into consideration the impact on corporates or the banks, where we also have ratings coverage. We've written up a short article for further detail, or we can refer specific questions to colleagues for analysts covering those sectors, if you will.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks very much. Just in time. And now we're going to the Q&A, and the first two questions are for Paula. How likely it is that all non-Castillo parties will unite against him, and that the voters will follow, considering that if we add up what would be considered conservative vote in Peru is larger than the liberal leftist vote? And the second one is, how important might be Veronica Mendoza's support to Castillo? Could it provide him with some of the experience he and his parties lack, and possibly even provide him with ministers and an eventual government, especially since Castillo has not introduced his government team yet?
Okay. In relation to the first question, I think that many of the right-wing or right-oriented party have already united against Castillo and have expressed support for Fujimori. The problem in Peru is that we don't really have organized parties, so we don't have we don't have parties, organized parties, and we don't have either partisan loyalties. So this it doesn't translate that this is going to mean that all the voters that voted for these candidates are going to vote for Keiko, and just because they have the endorsement of the leaders. The challenge here is that the elections are not unidimensional, and what is being discussed and what is in stake is not only the economic issue or the economic model question. And many voters, as I was trying to explain in the presentations, have serious doubts with Fujimori because of her democratic credentials, their past Fuerza Popular, past behavior and responsibilities. So they don't feel necessarily are that a good bunch of undecided voters that are not really willing to support Keiko either. So this is the challenge. They have to. She has to convince those that might on the economic issue might be lean to support her proposals, but that they don't believe her and they are like really against Fujimorismo. And that will be like my answer. So it's not, you cannot take it as a given that if the party supports, this party support Keiko, she will win. It's a battle that she has to fight for these votes. And about Mendoza's support, again, the issue or the difficulty to predict things here in Peru is that we are not talking about organized, like all organized settled parties. And Castillo's party is not really his party. It's a party of another character that is named Cerrón Palomino, who is the owner of this party and invited him as a candidate. And Cerrón, we don't know much about them yet, and they don't seem to have an easy relationship. And Cerrón is much more clearly, it's much more openly and clearly radical, even than Castillo for some things. And he has many legislators that were his party's candidates more than Castillo's. So that relationship is not clear yet. And the coalition with Mendoza and Juntos por el Perú, for example, from what I have heard, rumors in politics has been being fought by Cerrón's people, because Cerrón doesn't want, Cerrón wants his people to govern. So he didn't want to really go with an alliance with Mendoza because that would mean to lose control of the agenda and positions and possible cadres. So I'm not sure, and I don't think nobody can tell yet that if this alliance will really mean something in terms of providing really more ministers or cadres. That is going to be like a hard negotiation between factions that are really fighting their positioning. They are not. I don't think there's a clear balance there yet. But it may be one of the options, particularly if the margin of distance between the intention polls began to get closer. I believe that Juntos por el Perú will have more power to negotiate. No, as long as the margin stays bigger, Cerrón will have like a much more power to impose his agenda, and they will be more have more leeway to think that they don't need to moderate and make gestures and everything. So that is my balance here.
Thank you, Paula. And Kelly, in terms of these the governability challenges that you already touched, but we have questions also on that regard. How does the rating agency see that the governability problem will come back in Peru, since we saw 4 presidents 5 years? What are the chances, from your perspective, from either Castillo or Keiko being threatened by this fragmented legislative body? And there's also, I guess, an increasing fear from the private sector in nationalizations or constitutional challenges. How do you see that process, especially on the mining sector, or this intention of changing the constitution, which in the announcement yesterday of the respaldo, the support from Veronica Mendoza to Castillo, that they're gonna attempt to do this constitutional assembly to change the constitution in Peru?
Maybe 2 points on governability, and then I can speak a little bit more concretely to rating sensitivities around some of the constitutional, because it matters what the substance of the constitutional change is, and
Yeah.
get there. One of the factors, kind of a minimum that we're looking to resolve the negative outlook for the next governmental term is an abatement, or at least a easing of some of the governability challenges that we saw. Maybe not a wholesale cessation of tensions. We accept that certainly tensions are normal within a term of government, but at least some degree of greater policy coherence between the key institutions of government, especially the executive and congressional branch capacity to at least tackle some of these more upfront, I think, reforms or issues, pension system challenges, but also some of the fiscal questions are more pressing in terms of certain budget priorities there. And I think there's some measures that were passed by the current Congress, and whether those will be, any of those would be rolled back to preserve fiscal space for more pandemic specific social spending, or capital measures that would have higher fiscal, more immediate fiscal multipliers, are part of kind of the questions that we're monitoring. And again, to kickstart growth in an inequality fashion, and as well as address some of the labor market and kind of these social issues. So we're looking, though, fundamentally, first of all and foremost, for a degree of greater stability and policy cohesiveness within the intergovernmental relationship. So certainly capacity to legislate and move forward on some of these issues. Some of the watch points that are kind of troubled the last administration were a high cabinet turnover. Certainly key ministerial posts can slow down investment projects, create a fear to sign, a lot of early stage congressional investigations that may not result in the most productive policy making, if you will, or create a lot of potential fishing net challenges. So certainly cabinet instability, but then also the degree of political instability that we saw in November, not only in terms of the executive turnover, but that triggered some of the mass demonstrations and some of the resulted in the loss of life of 2 individuals. That undermines confidence in growth, investment, and just the capacity of basic government functions, if you will, certainly within a pandemic period. So we expect there will be certainly a reset with the new Congress, new administration, but the ability to govern and move forward on some of these fairly steep challenges is key for us. Congressional fragmentation adds more fluidity. We're looking at a Congress that's the most fragmented in at least I think the last 3 terms from what I read. And so things could be more fluid, or if there's difficulty with party discipline and we see more defections, that can also result in challenges. So within the triple B category, there's room for, say, political hiccups and surprises. We rate Thailand also at triple B, but that does incorporate a negative notch for the frequent political instability. The capital markets are stronger, and the government has a deeper pool of domestic financing, which helps shield the currency from volatility. And actually, some of the smaller regional economies, governments issue within in the Thai baht market, which adds additionally to the capital there. So it's it's not all apples to oranges, but
Yeah.
there's rating peers in the category that have other sustaining factors, if you will. On the constitutional points, certainly the policy proposals that, I need to say this a bit more clearly, but the policy proposals that undermine the free market, pillars of the economy, respect for contracts, create more uncertainty for investors, both equity but also bondholders, and undermine confidence in growth prospects and the certainty of investment would undermine confidence in the credit trajectory, have negative spillovers as well for public finances, its growth and investment flows, more medium term, as well if institutional pillars such as the fiscal framework or the central bank mandate or independence is materially undermined or really causes negative material long-term negative confidence shocks in that direction, well, could trigger more negative, a degree of rating pressure. Again, this depends on the specific policy proposals and what the implications are. But certainly there's several points in the party platform that we're monitoring and looking at the candidate statements and as well during the debates and the press statements, and then as well as particularly Mr. Castillo's economic team and policy advisors are named, and those that have the authority to speak on the campaign behalf, we're monitoring and tracking with regard to more forward expectations on the economic policy front.
Thank you, Kelly. And in the few minutes, each one of you, everybody's focused on Castillo because he was the dark horse, the black swan, or maybe the gray rhino. You never know. But in political terms, Paula, what are going to be the challenge for Keiko Fujimori? How would you foresee a victory of Fujimori, and what kind of government we would expect from her? And the same from you, Kelly, on the risk profile for Peru on a potential Fujimori administration. And after that, I'll pass it on to you, Maria Rosa, for the finish of the program.
Sure.
Okay, what challenges for a possible Fujimori administration? Well, this will, as I was trying to explain, either Fujimori or Castillo, they both are going to be weak presidents. No, they have been elected with a very small margin of votes in the first round, so they have both a very weak legitimacy from its electoral origin. Even if they will, one of them is going to inevitably win, no? the runoff, but she's not going to have it easy either. On the one hand, I think that she may have an easier front in Congress than Castillo, because she may be more able to get to some kind of pacts with at least some of the of several of the parties that are represented there, not only by the clearly right wing, but also like more the other centric parties and everything. But still, she will have to deal with a left coalition that may block some initiatives of reforms, but she could try to negotiate and manage that. I think more. No, she also has some votes to block the possibility of having the Congress vacate. I don't know what's the English word, because it's not impeachment. It's not impeachment, no? But using this mechanism of vacancia to oust her. So in that sense, it may be I think someone asked that question. She may be better positioned to finish or to have a longer period, her term, or finish her term or be positioned. But at the same time, that being said, I think she's not going to have it easy, because she's gonna have a high demands in the population. Probably it's coming a lot of protests, mobilizations, and she's gonna be being followed very closely by both domestic and international observers on the human rights and democratic agenda. She's gonna be control, or she's gonna be watched in this area also. So how she handles the protests, how she responds to them, that could be a flank open for her government also, no? Especially because her discourse in the first one was based on mano dura, on strengthening hand and being like tough on crime, not only in crime, but you could also think on process. So it's not going to be necessarily easy on the governability, openly more broadly understand front.
Thank you, Paula. And Kelly, and we'll finish with that, and then we'll pass into Maria Rosa.
I mean, I can speak maybe a bit more to the landscape. I think after winning the election, we expect more macro policy continuity, limited appetite to change the Constitution, and certainly more tweaks to existing policies, more refinement. But Keiko Fujimori has been fairly explicit that she respects the Constitution and upholds the economic chapter of the Constitution. That said, once a candidate wins the election and is inaugurated, then there's a challenge of governing, and all of the pandemic related challenges, a recovering labor market, the need to diversify or move ahead with diversification in the economy. We've seen copper intensity and sensitivity increase over the last at least 5 to 6 years. So there's tremendous need to increase productivity and throughout the economy, through moving forward with infrastructure, called infrastructure projects, but also reinvest in human capital, social services, from water to fiber optic cable, fibra optica, tremendous educational challenges and other social issues that are only beginning to be able to be more sustainably addressed as vaccines begin to be deployed. But I think there's risks of more longer term scarring that we're only really beginning to learn about across the region and including in North America as well, and more fundamental challenges that require a greater degree of policy coherence and political will to address on a more sustainable level. That will be a key test to whoever leads in the executive office, and certainly management of relationships with the Congress will be key, and support from the Congress, and there could be governability challenges there, but it's a fairly steep agenda, if you will.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks. Then for you, Maria Rosa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jose. Thank you, Kelly and Paula, for meeting with us and sharing your expertise. On behalf of the Peruvian American Association, it has been a pleasure to have you today with us and look together at Peru's future. I would like to thank our hardworking association team for making this event possible, Executive Secretary Linda Calvet and Program Officer Laura Dominguez especially. The Andean American Associations have on their calendar the June 2nd, mark your calendars, because the Ecuadorian American Association, together with the Andean Americans, we're gonna host the president of the World Bank, David Malpass. So stay tuned for further information. You'll be receiving our invitations. If you would like more information about the Peruvian American or the Andean American Association, make sure you look in the invitation at the end. There is an email, associations@andean.us, that you could write for any further information. It's a pleasure to have you today with us, and we hope to see you soon. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sí, thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Qué lindos. Qué maravilla. Gracias.
Take care.